And one of the things that's amazing, George, is there's a word I've got to share with people. It's called the Septuagint, and that's the Hebrew Bible translated into Greek. Now, listen to this, okay? This is Isaiah 13. Lift up a standard on the mountains of the plain, exalt the voice of them, beckon with the hand, open the gates, ye rulers. I give command and I bring them. Giants are coming to fulfill my wrath, rejoicing at the same time and insulting. You know, we've talked a lot about stargates. It's becoming more prevalent and prominent. For instance, a good example is about maybe a month ago, the NASA announced that there was Martian Morse code. Did you see that story?
Yes, I did.
Well, what's truly intriguing about that is when Tim and my film crew were down in Peru and Bolivia in the Altiplano, and the late David Flynn, who wrote Cydonia, The Secret Chronicle of Mars, put forth the fact that there is an actual language engraved into the landscape. And I've talked to scientists in the last couple months trying to get the deciphering going. Now, it's my contention that obviously NASA and the supercomputers have already deciphered the language of the fallen angels. And isn't it interesting that even the Incan priests had a way of tying knots called quipu and could tell the whole history of the fallen angels, the giants, and everything. So what I'm saying is, as I talk and we research this all over the world, people are talking about strange anomalies, strange phenomenon, stargates opening, everything from flying saucers, orbs, and things have changed, pun intended, in the atmosphere. Even tonight over Pennsylvania, a new strange meteor, and everything is not a meteor. The different colors indicate different compositions. So it's battle in outer space, battle on inner space, battle under the ground, and now things coming up on the ground. And, you know, when you ask me how we follow these leads, we're basically going out of the book of Genesis, chapter 6, talking about the giants in those days before the flood and after those days, and people just don't get it. I mean, I cannot find, after 40 years, any place in the world that does not have its legends of giants and, the fallen angels having sex with earth women, and it's all over. Now look at the genetic manipulation going on, and it's fascinating because this is the very same stuff that Francis Bacon talked about in 1626.
And the mixture, Stephen, of animal and human, to me, is absolutely bizarre, and it's going to get worse, isn't it?
It is going to get worse. When I wrote the book Genetic Armageddon, we announced that on your show 10 years ago and followed up with the latest book, Xenogenesis. It was so hard, George, for people to wrap their mind around the fact that the day would come when animal and human genetic material would be combined to literally bring back the mythological creatures that have so filled the pages of history. And that's why I use the title True Legends. Xenogenesis means a third set of DNA, interesting, 3-parent children, that's added into the mixture. And so what we're talking about in the New Atlantis isn't really the New Atlantis, it's the Old Atlantis. And the very fact that this ancient technology, and including stargates. Now, most people can't even grasp that. They think it was just a series on TV and a great movie, which in my opinion was a great movie. But what's more important right now is all of the geophysical activity going on Earth. Obviously, we've got the volcanoes going off. I said 10, 12 years ago when you started with COAST, how long was that, 12 years, 14 years?
2003, full-time.
Okay, 2003, but you started 2002 part-time.
2001 part-time.
Okay, so that's 15 years ago, and I remember the first time I was on, we were talking about stuff that just people couldn't handle. Even the day would come when this sort of genetic manipulation would take place. Now, what is the number one drudge headline dealing with what the billionaires want? The billionaires basically want eternal life. They want life extension, They want to go to the stars.
And bunkers.
And bunkers. Isn't isn't that bunkers, billionaires for bunkers? By the way, I used to be in that business years ago.
Really?
Yeah. And, as partners with a guy, we were building underground shelters, kind of like a spherical fiberglass structure. So I take specific interest in that. As a matter of fact, some gentleman sent me an email today saying that they have a giant, totally renewed bunker, and wanted to know if I knew anybody that wanted to buy it. They only wanted $15 million for it.
That's all.
I'll pass.
Yeah.
But the thing is that there is a general feeling, and I talk to a lot of different people, George, I mean, all over the world, and people on their yachts are heading out, and what's really important we've got to get through tonight is the fact that we are at the most dangerous time now with the Russian and U.S. basically squaring off, diplomatic relations breaking off, and by the way, this all has to do with the same thing of fallen angels, because it is the plan to generate a World War III, and then bring on the man of peace, who the Bible refers to as the Antichrist.
It is tense. I mean, I was a kid, Stephen, during the Cold War, and I remember that. I mean, I remember in school we had to do these bomb shelter drills and, get under desks. I don't know what that was going to do to protect us, but they scared the living daylights out of us as kids, and it feels like it's getting even more tense than that.
Well, today, and let's just say this, you've had Gary Haven on, and he produced the movie Amerigeddon, which I'd encourage everybody to get, okay? Amerigeddon. And it's a story about what's going on right now with the potential for an EMP. Even today, the talk behind the scenes, George, people are emailing military, former intelligence, et cetera, saying they are really concerned about that the North Korean satellites could, basically be detonated, and the EMP could be used in conjunction. Now, the Russians, I believe Vladimir Putin has done an amazing job. Now, let me clarify this, to try and warn the West how very dangerous it is, and yet almost with reckless abandonment, we have a State Department of government who just proceeds full speed ahead. For instance, the Russian embassy obviously being attacked by freedom fighters or ISIS, who we back in Syria, and Russia knows exactly the provocation. So today, Russia basically put their bombers, and this is coming from insiders, they put their bombers into the old Cold War patterns where they'd fly right to the point where things would get hot and then pull them back. They put up their equivalent of Looking Glass, and Looking Glass is basically the airborne command system. So as you and I are talking, and everybody worldwide is listening, this thing with Russia and the United States is not decreasing. It's increasing in intensity. And again, I remember ducking under, I was like, 1962, 64, I think was like 12 years old, and I remember ducking under, and I remember, the civil defense panels, and let me make this clear, this is very important. 40 million people being moved into bunkers is not an exercise. It is a nuclear war deployment. I used to write about Russian war policy. Civil defense is an integral part of their whole plan, basically, not only to fight a nuclear war if they have to, but to shelter their people. Moscow's population is 12 million, so they basically have pretty close to 3.3 times Moscow's population already moved, with 200,000, emergency services, military personnel, and so this is not a light thing. This is not a light thing. In the Yamato Mountains, which is the underground control center for all of Russia, it's 400 square miles, by the way, underground. I don't think people can grasp that. 400 square miles.
And Syria could be the point where all of this implodes, Stephen.
Absolutely, and that's the critical issue. By the way, the Russians have moved their S-300 missiles into Syria, into
right.
Tartarus, the port there, and that's one of the most sophisticated missiles. The only people that can be used for are the U.S. So, you know, if the National Security Council meets, whenever they meet in secret and they decide, well, we're going to push this, then we're going to be in big trouble. This is something that is very critical. There are communications going on, and I noticed that you were talking about the satellites having issues.
Mm-hmm. GPS problems.
Yes, in a shooting war, the very first thing that is taken out is command, control, and communication, which the military calls C3. When I saw that story posted on the London Daily Mail, I thought, uh-oh, somebody's sending another message, and the message simply is this: we can blind your eyes in the skies. So, you know, this is a very important series of events, and I've got a new word I'll break on tonight. You know, I believe that the mainstream media, which you know I'm not fond of, I call them vomit brokers, and I call them now the circus distracticus, okay? They distract the viewers of mainstream with what I would call inane stories about who's you know, the newest TV star to be robbed in France, or this or that, or who's, you know, marrying who, getting divorced. It's all distraction. Right now we have major issues that can turn hostile. And like going back to Amerigeddon, you know, we're seeing reports of UN troops, and this is something people have got to understand. We are seeing our country ultimately brought under United Nations control. The idea, and you and I talked about this on Coast to Coast.
And we've given up the Internet.
We've given up the Internet, and the United Nations will ultimately take over the entire police force and sheriff's department in the United States. That's the end game, and that's why all the racial tension and strife is being generated. And I've asked the question, I propose it. You know, I think these shooters, it doesn't matter who, need to have background checks, and they always seem to disappear. Whether it's a law enforcement or a false flag shooter, it's always multiple reports, meaning in the false flags there are multiple shooters seen, and then it all boils down to one crazy guy who's got a bad attitude, okay? So the thing is that, same thing in the police department. I've warned law enforcement for years. I was told this by a former spy who's dead now, that they would introduce, they being the people that wanted civil war in this country, they would introduce very evil men into police departments to stir up the masses. So I'm really trying to speak out and pray that, you know, God will open the eyes of people to see that this is a setup. Because when the case is made that local law enforcement or sheriff's department or highway patrol can no longer contain a situation, well, then they bring the military. But if the military is out of country, as they're being dispersed all over the country, our military, guess who's here? United Nations.
Oh, that's right. It's a disaster if that happens.
Well, and I believe that this is where we're at. We're in a very dangerous situation. I'd encourage people to pay attention to what's going on between and watch the Russian statements. I've learned one thing about Russians. I've dealt with enough of them, interviewed them, to know they say what they mean and mean what they say. And they're not like the United States, which tries to bluff its way through foreign policy. They will respond, and already President Putin, I think, has demonstrated more than a half a dozen times that Russia's electronic warfare weapons are more than capable of disabling, you were in the Navy, the most expensive Navy missile cruisers like the Donald Cook and others, just with their electronic warfare capabilities. So we're in a very, very serious and precarious position right now.